We start today with um, while the most of this live stream will be about good news, we do start today with a bit of a downer. So I'm asking people to pray for the repose of the soul of Father Nicholas Gregoris. He was one of the founders along with Father Peter Stravinskas, of the Priestly Society of St. John Henry Newman. He passed away suddenly yesterday on the commemoration of the feast of Pope St. Pius X. He's a faithful priest, and he was a good friend of the founders of the page here I'm showing you this from. We were friends on Facebook and probably on Twitter also. So please pray for the repose of the soul of Father Nicholas Gregoris. It was really strange seeing that happen suddenly in my news feed yesterday. As you can tell from the picture I had on the screen of him was a young priest, relatively young. So please pray for the repose of his soul. Now, we're going to talk today about miracles, signs, and wonders. I don't cite the modern catechism of the Catholic Church all too often because, as I've said before, the catechism, the new one, is a hot mess. It's frankly too cumbersome to be all that useful, and it has ambiguous language in it, and was said by the cardinal who helped put it together back in the 1990s that the thing was a mess when it was done and published, and that it would need to be redone in the near future. Now, 30 years later, it's still in basically the same shape it was beforehand. And again, that's not my critique. It's the critique offered by a cardinal who, for John Paul II, put the thing together. And he was not exactly a rad trad either. But sometimes the catechism can be useful, like today. Let's preface this by reminding ourselves about the purpose of what Scripture calls signs and wonders. These are miracles of various kinds. We as Catholics are warned by the Church not to seek out miracles, which is why I rarely report on Eucharistic miracles, because weirdly they can replace people's faith in Christ. They're definitely interesting. They can bolster our faith when taken in due measure, but there are people who build their entire faith around miracles and prophecies and the kind, and that can be a very, very real problem. But authentic miracles do have a purpose: to help those who don't believe to believe. It's why Eucharistic miracles are best understood as an intervention, because they are almost always tied to widespread disbelief in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, often happening in parish communities where there is virtually no belief in the real presence, or in the heart of the priest offering the Mass because he doesn't believe in the real presence. There are entirely too many stories about miracles, and Eucharistic miracles especially, from Catholic history to honestly interpret it otherwise. But here's what the Catechism says in paragraph 548 about signs and wonders. Quote, "The signs worked by Jesus attest that the Father has sent him. They invite belief in him. To those who turn to him in faith, he grants what they ask. So miracles strengthen faith in the one who does his Father's works. They bear witness that he is the Son of God. But his miracles can also be occasions for offense. They are not intended to satisfy people's curiosity or desires for magic. Despite his evident miracles, some people reject Jesus. He is even accused of acting by the power of demons." End quote. And that last bit is actually really important. We see that critique all the time from Protestants who claim that Our Lady of Fatima was a demon, which is utter blasphemy. I can't tell you the number of times I've had to ban Protestants in my comment section who say that about Our Lady at Fatima and other places. These days, Eucharistic miracles happen in so-called ordinary form parishes, where belief in the real presence has been documented to be horrifyingly low among regular Mass attendees. And that's a subject I've covered ad nauseum. But today, we're talking about the most hotly debated sign from God possibly of all time, other than the resurrection, of course. And that would be the Shroud of Turin. You see, back in the 1980s and even before that, various scientific organizations carbon dated the Shroud of Turin, and their findings said the holy image was made at some point in the Middle Ages, maybe during the Renaissance. Now, Catholics and various other kinds of Christians disputed those findings based on how flawed carbon dating actually is and on the methods used in that particular carbon dating procedure. Needless to say, Christians tended to believe in the Shroud of Turin. Skeptics did not, and there was no meeting of the minds on this point of debate about the reality of God. There was no middle ground. Nor, by the way, I'm going to point out something. You may have noticed this about the Shroud of Turin debates. If you notice, no Christians point out that the claims that other Christians make that God does not want to make holy images of any kind were debunked if anybody believed in the validity of the Shroud of Turin, since it was Jesus himself giving us an image of his own holy face. It's hard to say that God does not want us making images of divine things when he provided one for us himself. I don't see that being pointed out very often, so I figured I'd point out the obvious with that. It's kind of odd how that never comes up in our internal Christian debates. But regardless of that, for decades we've lived in a reality where most people watching channels like this believed in the Shroud of Turin being real and as an authentic image of Christ, and atheists not at all. That's going to start changing. Remember, smarter atheists of goodwill, don't believe that Jesus was a myth. They believe we made an influential preacher into God. And for those atheists, this story is something that they have to begin wrestling with if the story I have for you today is any indicator, because we're going to talk about the shroud, the findings on it, because other people have talked about that. But we're going to talk also about a conversion that happened because of people who investigate the shroud and did so in an honest way, could not square their atheism with what they found about the shroud when they actually looked at it themselves. Let's start with basic facts of history. Tim Gordon covered this yesterday, as did Taylor Marshall. But if you haven't heard the basics, we'll go to Newsweek, and I love using hostile sources for this because it's pretty illustrative. So their headline here is Turin Shroud Study Claims Controversial Cloth Dates Back to the Time of Jesus. Here's the quick version of the article. There was a new Italian X-ray study of the Shroud of Turin, and it confirmed that it dates to 2,000 years ago. This debunks previously flawed carbon dating. The shroud was scientifically matched to a piece of linen known to date from the siege of Masada in 72 AD. And while that's important because the way various forms of dating work, including carbon dating and other things, is they try to find something to compare it to that they know came from the purported era. Era being the right term. You can't get these dating methods, don't give you a precise July 12th, 74 AD kind of thing. What they will give you is the purported era. And that's what's important here. Also, the blood in the image of the shroud is actually blood. And it has the hallmarks of someone who went through the horrible experiences that Christ experienced to open the gates of heaven for us, if we're simply willing to carry our crosses and follow him on the straight and narrow path. The blood in the shroud contains all the hallmarks of someone who went through the passion that Christ did. Now, here's a bit from the article for your consideration. Quote, a team of Italian researchers have entered the debate over the Shroud of Turin, the linen cloth believed by some to have been Jesus Christ's burial shroud. A study published in the journal Heritage, the authors conducted dating work on a sample from the shroud, coming to the conclusion that it may be a 2,000-year-old relic. The shroud, which has long been the subject of intense scrutiny, features a faint image of a man that some believes is the body of Jesus, miraculously imprinted onto the cloth. While the latest study does not discuss the questions of whether or not the artifact was indeed Jesus' burial shroud, the authors did find that its age is roughly consistent with this time. The findings challenge previous research supporting a medieval origin of the shroud, which is one of the most studied archaeological objects in the world. End quote. The article then goes on in a purely atheistic fashion to say that the scientific consensus is that it comes from the Middle Ages and is a forgery. And of course, they have to go there. They have to say that because it's Newsweek, right? They're not exactly a Catholic or even a non-denominational sort of Christian news outlet. But what their claim there is actually not true, since scientists examined it in Italy and found it wasn't from the Middle Ages. Other studies have been able to reproduce the image down to the microscopic detail. Well, other studies have been unable, rather, to reproduce the image down to the microscopic detail using painting methods known at the time. It's still alleged to have been forged. So again, no, there is no consensus about the Shroud of Turin among the scientific community. This is especially true when we consider how the scientists dated the shroud in this new study out of Italy. Now, for this, we turn to another secular outlet because something that's really weird to me about this is that there hasn't been any. I've looked at Catholic news sources and there hasn't been anything. reporting on this. So it's a little weird. So we turn here to metro.uk for this headline. Scientists analyzing the cloth Jesus was buried in, notice the quotes there, make huge breakthrough. Scientists use a new method for dating, one that is more accurate than carbon dating. And look, I don't know the limits of that method of analysis. It's a very new method. But for this, the scientists seem pretty confident about the reality of the shroud. I'll give you a short quote about that here from the article, but it's worth noting that first the article goes over the alleged debunking of the Shroud of Turin by scientists in the 1980s. Okay, again, secular media are going to do the things the secular media does on questions of faith. But then it says this quote, but now Italian researchers have used a new technique involving X rays to date the material, and their findings show it was manufactured about 2,000 years ago, around the time Jesus lived and died. Scientists at Italy's Institute of Crystallography of the National Research Council conducted a recent study using wide angle X ray scattered, or wax, Mail Online reports. The method measures the natural aging of flax cellulose and converts it to the time since manufacture. They say the timings add up and lend credibility to the theory that the faint bloodstain of a bearded man with his arms folded in front of him were left behind by Christ's body. Researchers compared their findings with the results from analysis of other linens found in Israel, which date back to the first century. The study, published in the journal Heritage, said, quote, the data profiles were fully compatible with analogous measures obtained on a linen sample whose dating, according to historical records, is 55 to 74 AD, found at Masada, which is Herod's famous fortress built on limestone bedrock overlooking the Dead Sea. Lead author Dr. Liberato De Cotto said in a statement that the 1988 test should be deemed as incorrect because, quote, fabric samples are usually subject to all kinds of contamination, which cannot be completely removed from the dated specimen. If the cleaning procedures of the sample is not thoroughly performed, carbon-14 dating is not reliable. This may have been the case in 1988, as confirmed by experimental evidence showing that when moving from the periphery towards the center of the sheet along the longest side, there is a significant increase in carbon-14, end quote. And there you have it. I have no problem using scientific methods when honestly used to test things. We, as believers, have nothing to hide. And quite frankly, science is a toolkit that lets us examine the reality of the world that God gave to us. It's been a useful method at looking at Eucharistic miracles and separating the miraculous from the mundane or the fraudulent. And it's worth pointing out, these methods can make good inroads with atheists who are honest brokers. They have legitimate reasons that are based on faulty reasoning for not believing in God. That is to say, they made a logical conclusion based on imperfect knowledge and evidence to believe what they do believe. So pray that more people, like what I'm going to tell you in this next story, come to see the truth about Christ because of this new study. And it's worth asking yourself this question: how many people were led out of faith because of the Shroud of Turin mess in 1988? How many souls were lost because of bad scientific methods? How many? Think about that one. Meditate on that question for yourself as we talk about some good news here. So we go to the Mirror for this story, and we're going to have to be careful here because this website is a bad pop-up mess. So there's a picture of the man we're going to talk about here. I'm actually going to remove this from screen because that website is the most ads I think I've ever seen on a website, and some of them are pretty spicy, or which especially concerning for a mainstream news outlet. So instead, I'm going to the man you saw briefly there. He's a documentary filmmaker, and he used to be an atheist who had a radical conversion because of the Shroud of Turin, and he's made a documentary film called Who Can He Be? And we're going to just leave his film page up there instead because it's much safer. But that Mirror headline was, atheist who tried to prove Shroud of Turin was fake becomes Christian after alarming evidence. David Rolfe was interested in the Shroud of Turin, wanted to know where the Shroud of Turin is, and so set off on a journey during which he says he found new evidence. Again, I would normally show you at least the headline from the article, but this website has the worst pop-up ads I've ever seen. So here's his documentary film website. I've heard many stories of atheists who came to know and love our Lord because they first started out trying to disprove some miracle and instead found it was real, and then just used logic to figure out that they were seeing real evidence before their eyes about the reality of Christ. And if they are honest brokers, and I've known a lot of atheists in my time. I'm from Portland, Oregon originally. I went to public university in Portland. I know more than my fair share of atheists. Some of them can be real nasty pieces of work, but others are truth-seeking people who just came to the wrong conclusion based on the evidence they had at hand. So, I like seeing stories like this, and I hope you do too. And please pray that any atheists who see this story that's making headlines in the secular press, they have a conversion of heart. So please keep them in your prayers. But here's the relevant here from the article, longer quote than I've done so far today. Quote, a former atheist who set out to prove the Shroud of Turin was fake has become Christian after encountering new evidence. David Rolfe said he cannot possibly understand anything else that could have produced that image, in reference to the picture of a blood-soaked imprint of a man matching Jesus Christ's description on cloth relic. The filmmaker set out to make a documentary on the Shroud of Turin, one of the most revered religious artifacts in history, and said he had intended to find a prosaic explanation. But the photography expert, who was British, was so astonished with what he discovered, he's converted to Christianity. David spoke this week after a more recent analysis of the artifact using modern X-ray techniques, once again, placed the cloth's origin back to the time of Christ. I started off as an atheist and then became an agnostic, and now I'm a Christian because I cannot possibly understand anything else that could have produced that image, David said. The 14-foot-long shroud features a faint brownish image of a 5-foot-6-inch tall man with sunken eyes, wounds on various parts of his body that match the injuries suffered during Jesus' crucifixion. David has put up a $1 million, 770,000 pound prize for anyone who can recreate the shroud's image of a crucified man without showing traces of ink, paint, or other agents. Prominent research in the 1980s appeared to debunk the idea the shroud was used to wrap Jesus' body because testing dated it to the Middle Ages, long after Jesus' death, but new research suggests otherwise. David, who recently released a new documentary called Who Can He Be?, continued, I am convinced the Shroud of Turin is authentic. I personally have no doubt. The man explained the 1980 research focused on a small corner of the shroud, which had been repaired sometime between 1200 and 1400 due to wear and tear. It was paraded by bishops throughout history during religious ceremonies in Turin, Italy, where it is housed. This means the fabric tested was older than the rest of the material, explained the filmmaker. The shroud also does not show signs of ink or dye that would suggest it was a fake. No visible trace of any paint, ink, dye, stain, or pigments. Contestants, meaning those who want to win his $1 million prize money, must match both the pattern of blood stains seen on the Shroud of Turin and the composition of blood, including hemoglobin, bilirubin, immunoglobulin, and albumin, according to the rules of the challenge. In addition, the largest blood stains should exhibit surrounding areas of ultraviolet fluorescence as noted on the shroud. When light and shade are reversed as in a photographic negative, the image must appear as a realistic, anatomically accurate representation of a body. David told Mail Online no one in his native Britain had claimed the $1 million prize. He added, no one has come forward either from America to claim it. Once they realize what the actual image characteristics are on the cloth, they quickly realize that they can't reproduce it. More than 170 peer-reviewed academic papers have been published about the mysterious linen since the 1980s, with many concluding it to be genuine. Who the cloth relic belonged to is another matter, however. End lengthy quote. So yes, authentically studying the Shroud of Turin has led to the conversion of atheists of goodwill, who are honest truth seekers who just came to an erroneous conclusion because they based their logical reasoning off of faulty evidence. So please take this good news about the Shroud of Turin and pray for more conversions to the faith by men and women of goodwill who have been wrestling with the faith question. Because remember what the church says about signs and wonders. And here we'll just go back to where I started here with Catechism paragraph 548. Quote, the signs worked by Jesus attest that the Father has sent him. They invite belief in him. To those who turn to him in faith, he grants what they ask. So miracles strengthen faith in the one who does his Father's works. They bear witness that he is the Son of God, but his miracles can also be occasions for offense. They are not intended to satisfy people's curiosity or desire for magic. Despite his evident miracles, some people reject Jesus. He is even accused of acting by the power of demons. End quote. So yes, please pray that those honest brokers see this for what it is, and they have a miraculous interior conversion. And maybe, go check out Mr. Rolf's recent documentary, Who Can He Be? I don't know where it's available. Check your streaming services that you have. If not, you can go find his website, and I'll have links to this in my show notes at returntotradition.org a little bit before my news video for the day goes live. Laura says the Shroud and Our Lady of Guadalupe are the first selfies. I mean, the miracles of Our Lady of Guadalupe are interesting around that miraculous image. There have been some more recent scientific analyses of that, of the tilma, where they zoom in on her eyes and you can actually see the reflection in her eyes of the people who were in the room when it was unveiled. I'm just saying, there are people out there trying to say, oh, this thing was Our Lady of Guadalupe, never happened. It was simply a fabrication of the bishop based on some myths of the Virgin Mary, based from his home where he was from in Spain. It was meant to pull a fast one on the local population. I'm like, okay, well, one, nobody knows what kind of pigmentation is on that thing, that no one has been able to identify it. And the other, the eyes were, if it's a painting done by a human hand, no one knows how it was possible today, let alone at that time, to paint the eyes of Our Lady of Guadalupe in such a way that you could see the faces of the people who were in the room when it was unveiled. And they've identified them based on pictures of the bishop from that time period. So I'm just saying, they can bolster your faith, but I also caution people to not get too deep into prophecy and miracles and things. But this is an important story for very obvious reasons. Colleen says, we used to have the Shroud Center here in Orange County, California. Been to it several times. Impressive. Yeah, it seems to have been fallen out of style. I would hope that this story actually does take off more. And again, I checked Catholic news websites this morning before going live, because I'd rather have used Catholic World Report, Catholic News Agency, even Vatican News. I didn't see anything. But hopefully that will actually change as time goes on. If there's any final thoughts in the comments, your chance to get any thoughts in as we go before we wrap this up. And take a look here. Devout Catholics already knew the Shroud is real. People are barely finding out. Again, there are people I've encountered Catholics who believe it was fake too, who believe it was a painting done by some mysterious painter in the Middle Ages who's been forgotten about, and then church officials just kind of ran with it. I think it's kind of a cynical view of church history to think it was fake, though. Stephen Weber says, a great academic from my life spoke highly of the boundaries of religion and science and theism, atheism, creation, cosmology. Okay, that's good. All right. Let's see what's this. On April 23rd, St. Agnes, St. Paul the Cross, and St. Rose churches will be showing the new documentary. So that was last year by David Rolfe from the Shroud of Turin. So his documentary has been shown in parishes, if that makes you feel better about it. All right, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in today. And as always, pray for the church. Anthony Stine, Ave Maria.